Hello, Professor Gruhn here. We are continuing to go through our friend jQuery, Murach. We're now in Chapter 6, and Chapter 6 is, I'm not going to be providing any examples like I did in the other chapters. The book has done actually a really good job of providing all the samples you need. Chapter 6 is only 28 pages long or 27 pages long. So if you do two things, and that is have the book apps, chapter 6 code available for you, and just read through the book and flip through the examples and look at the code, it'll start to make sense. And the expectation I have for this chapter is that you start to understand the relationships between the behavior on the screen and the jQuery code that is making it work. You don't necessarily need to know how to write that code from scratch, but to start to be able to play with the code and make changes and to see how it works. So objectives: to use jQuery to add effects and animations to a web page. So one of the things that jQuery does a lot is add the glitz, add the effects, like things opening, closing, fading, moving, zooming, and things like that. Um, and even things you'll see like where a picture will fade in and fade out. And you'll start to learn and understand some of the terms in the animate method of jQuery. Here are some of the methods. You're going to show something or you might hide it, toggling it back and forth. You might slide up or slide down, a slide toggle, fade in, fade out, fade to a toggle, fade to. So you'll start to see these types of methods listed in the JavaScript jQuery code that you'll be looking at. Notice that you'll see a method name and then you'll see a an action that would happen with that method, and you'll be passing in parameters. So here's some examples. So here, for instance, you'll see startup message. So where that's the, notice the reference of the $ parentheses that we're going to take a look at. Look for the startup message, and we're going to do a fade out. Startup message, fade out, then a slide down. And so we can chain events together and put them together. So you'll start seeing code that looks like where we're referencing the object, the element on the page in the DOM, and then by referencing that element, then we're going to have it do something, have it animate. So the FAQ in the book here, book exercises, chapter 6, the FAQ application, notice how the jQuery title came in. Two events happened. One, the jQuery title came in, but then also the drop-downs faded in and out. I'm going to refresh the screen. The jQuery comes in, the drop-downs faded in and faded out. Now what's interesting is for some reason the on-click isn't working because there is no on-click event associated on this page. Looking at the code to that page, here's the JavaScript code, that what they did in the book, they commented out the fade-in part, and then they gave it with both sets of calls in there. So if this part of the code here is the zoom in where it's coming in, and then this part's the fade in, fade out. So if I take this fade in, let's take the fade out, and let's just change that to 5 seconds. If I save that, and now if I refresh the page, here comes the zoom in, the fade out. Now notice how it's taking a little longer before it fades out. Now, that's because I was able to locate this parameter here of 5,000. Now, if I was to just take this out totally, and maybe slow in the fade in, save it, refresh the page. Notice how now it's taking a lot longer, and there's no fade out at all. Let's add the fade out back into it. And if I was to fade out real fast, you'll see it come on slow. Oops, let's see what happened here. What did I break? 2 periods, that's why it didn't work. Refresh. Fade in. It's coming in slow, and watch it just disappear like that once it gets there. Boom. So here, what we're starting to understand is here's the fade out method, the fade in method. And we're seeing, here's the animate method. We can change the font size. Let's change what happens if we go to 500%. And let's make that 1,000. 1,000. Refresh the page. Look how much bigger it became. It became that much bigger by changing the parameters of what I wanted this to end up as, the font size here. If I change it to 10%, refresh the page. Look at that, it got really small. Maybe I only want it to be 125% from the normal, where it started off from. There, it got a little bigger. So what I have found in the web development that I've done is that most of the time we're not writing jQuery JavaScript from scratch anymore. What we're doing is we're understanding the elements on the page and the relationship between the jQuery code that we're given that we found in a plugin. And then we start to tweak how we use those various plugins. So this is getting us to page 197, 199. And so notice how the pieces of code that we were just playing with are highlighted there in yellow. There, effect, image color. Now the slideshow application with fading in and fading out added to the images. So let's pull up that code. Back. So slideshow, here's a version of the fading in and fading out. Just by clicking on it, you can see the fading in and fading out happening. And then let's take a look at here's the code that's doing that. And again, we're interested in what's happening here. We're starting to understand that the various objects are being called and that things and events are happening to the objects. So what's really good is the fear that we had in the first week of, oh, I have to know and learn all this code. You have to understand it at the sense of be able to read it, but you don't necessarily have to speak it from scratch. And you start to see the relationship between the code and the objects that are being presented. Let's take a look at slideshow 2. There, click. So there's different speed parameters being set to the fading there. And then you can look at the code there and you can see a different version of how that code's being written. Slideshow stop, not sure what this one's going to do. Not sure, I didn't look at the details of it. Image swap. Curious about that. So here we're seeing some bouncing around of the image as we're mousing over. That way we know it's kind of moving it up and down. And then by looking at the image swap code, we can start to figure out where this is happening line by line. And notice here what they did was they commented out some lines of code that you can actually uncomment them out and play with them and see how they work. So the real goal of this chapter is to start to read the chapter, and it explains in a lot more detail than me just reading it to you, how these various animation methods work and how they tie together, and then also look at the code and play with the examples, have the page open, pull up the actual code in the book apps, and take a look at each one of these and start to understand what it is that you're wanting to do. One thing to do also is if there's a jQuery library or jQuery plugin that you want, make sure that the code that you're changing as you're going to implement it for your own websites and for your own projects, make sure that that code, that you have a backup copy of it the way you had it before it started. Don't start changing the only one piece of code that you have, because then you might mess it up a little bit, and then with that, forget where your baseline was. So there's some pretty neat examples. The carousel application in the book. Let's see. Here's that. That's right at the end. And what's really good here is you could make your own carousel and then click on it and have it as a hot link to then go to a page. And so you could make a carousel on your website, and could be pictures of different things, and then put a link into another page for it. Or you could put in a link to an event that would maybe pop up a window to give more detail or something like that. So what this class is showing you is we're building more tools in our toolbox, and and you might not use every tool every time, but as you start to say, I like this tool, I like how this works, and that you're starting to be able to understand, to read some of the code that's being presented, and understand that there are things like properties of an object, there are methods that we can apply to these objects to make it do something. We start to learn the details of each individual one. So my goal in this is to not read the entire book, the entire chapter word for word, but to show you, kind of get you a feel for how to go through the chapter. 27 pages, probably in an hour and a half's time, maybe 2 hours of time. You can go through it, kind of read it, and get a sense of this code is doing this. And you'll be able to then complete the exercises at the end of the chapter pretty easily. Hope this helps, and have a great day.